Hello and welcome to the wolfSSL live webinar, FIPS 140-3 OE additions and planning for 2024 and beyond. Presented by wolfSSL Senior Engineer Kaleb. My name is Shizuka and I'll be moderating the webinar. All attendees will be in listen-only mode. If you have a question, please use the Q&A box. We will host a Q&A session following the presentation. The webinar will also be recorded and made available on our YouTube channel shortly after the presentation. I invite you to follow us on Twitter at wolfSSL as well as our other socials. Also, feel free to email us if you have any additional questions. And now I would like to give a brief company overview before we move to the technical presentation. Today, wolfSSL secure over 2 billion connections. We have more than 1,000 OEM customers and dozens of resellers. wolfSSL is made up of over 50 dedicated employees, most of which are engineers. This progress is of course supported by a strong partner network that we are proud of. Since the beginning, our engineering team has developed several embedded security products, including wolfCrypt with DO178 support, HIPS certification, and a HIPS-ready offering, MQTT up to the V5 specification, SSHB2, TPM 2.0, a secure bootloader known as a wolfboot, as well as Java wrapper and JSSC support, and commercial support for core. All of these offerings are accompanied by maintenance and support plans up to the 24/7 level. We also offer full service consulting. And now I would like to turn it over to Kaleb to talk about FIPS 140-3 OE additions and planning for 2024 and beyond.
Thank you so much, Shizuka, for the intro. And thank you everyone for attending today. So we're excited to be giving you a status update on where we are with FIPS 140-3 submissions. So that'll be our first agenda topic, progress updates, and then we'll cover the most notable differences between 140-2 and 140-3. And I know the agenda says standards, but we're going to talk a little bit about some of the nuances between our specific module as well as this overall standards. And then we'll cover some insights on post-quantum and NSA 2.0 suite, as that is starting to approach. We're starting to see some more demand for in the near term LMS and XMS ciphers for signing and verification that will be required. I believe it's 2025, maybe 2028. That those are fully mandatory, and then the other post-quantum algorithms will come in 2028, 2030, and ultimately by 2033, everyone will be fully transitioned to post-quantum. And then finally, at the end, we're going to open it up. So we are doing multiple FIPS 140-3 certifications. Historically, we've only had one active certification at a time, but things are changing rapidly enough in the world that we're doing two as of right now. We're about to begin work on a third 140-3 certificate, and then a fourth may follow in late 2024 or early 2025. And so we'd like to hear feedback from the industry and our customers. If there's something that you need or would like to see on the third or the fourth certificate that aren't on the first two submissions, then please, just make us aware of it so we can take it into consideration as we're doing those follow-on certificates. So this is kind of the overview of the timeline that we've been facing with the 140-3 submissions. You can see we started in late 2020. Well, I shouldn't say we started. The CMVP opened up testing in late 2020. They began accepting 140-3 submissions officially. Now, there were submissions happening prior to that September date. They were done through a pilot program. I believe Amazon and Apple were part of that pilot program. And that's the earliest FIPS 140-3 certificates that got cut late last year and the beginning of this year. Those were from the pilot submissions. And I'm not 100% sure if we've actually seen a 140-3 cert cut yet from anything that was submitted after September. Some of the more recent ones may have been post-pilot submissions, but I'm not 100% sure on that. But anyways, so we started our work in late 2020. We got our submission in around March of 2021, and we sat on the IUT list all the way up until April of 2022, so over a year. In that time, the CMVP, around February of 2022, they decided that they were going to interpret part of the standard, the ISO IEC standard, that was referencing how an IT administrator or someone physically sitting at a computer copying and pasting key material. There was something in the standard about like locking access to private keys as a user was physically copying and pasting them. Well, the CMVP decided to interpret that language to also apply to the heap and the stack space in a software module. So all the software modules had to go back and redo, add some feature to guard against accidentally moving private key material on the heap and the stack. So we addressed that problem by adding a mutex lock that protects access to private keys. It has to be manually unlocked before you can load private key material into the stack or the heap space, and then you're supposed to relock it when you're done. There's no runtime restrictions on that. You can unlock it at the beginning of a program, let the program run until it's about to shut down, and then lock it at the very end. Or you can lock and unlock access to the key material each time you're accessing a key. It's kind of up to the end user on how strict they want to be about that feature. So anyways, we sat on the IUT list for well over a year, waiting for the CMVP and our lab to be confident with the submission. Our lab finally submitted in April of 2022, and then we sat on the MIP list all the way until November of this year before we finally got our first round of comments. And the lab that we were working with, they had left out section 12 on all the security policy submissions they had been doing. So unfortunately, our submission got kicked back to the IUT list. We hit this special triage condition, and our lab is currently redoing all of their submissions, adding section 12 to all the security policies they did. And some of that, we can't fully blame the lab. The CMVP has been changing a lot throughout this time period. And then they get to reviewing submissions that happened before they made a change, and they say, oh, it's no good because you aren't abiding by the change we made here at this time, even though you submitted clear back here. So it's a bit of a moving target with 140-3, and it has been frustrating a lot of us in the community. But we're doing the best we can to deal with it in a timely manner. Meanwhile, we got to July of 2023, earlier this year, about 4 or 5 months ago, or 6 months, no, 5 months ago now. And we had the opportunity to join a similar pilot program to the one that happened back here. The CMVP is attempting to automate this entire process and take a lot of the manual reviewer time out to squish down these timelines where people are sitting on the in-process list in review pending state. They want the initial review to be done by essentially a computer. It'll check for obvious things, and this triage step can be handled that way. And then once you get the coordination, it'll it'll still be, as far as we understand, an actual human looking at it. But we jumped on board with the pilot opportunity that was presented to us, and we resubmitted the same module that was already in process. We did make some minor updates to make it a little more end user friendly. We added some extra debug logging, some printfs, etc., so that diagnosis of any errors could be done more easily. And we changed some of the error messages to be more helpful. Some of them were a little generic before. So anyways, that updated the version from 5.2.0 to 5.2.1. And we received ACVP algorithm certificates, or CAVP algorithm certificates for that on August 22nd. And then we submitted to the CMVP after doing testing with our lab on September 28th. It sat in review pending for only 2 days, went into review. It was in review for about 2 weeks. And then we moved into coordination. We received our first round of comments, and we're responding to those comments tomorrow on the 8th. So hopefully this one moves a lot faster than this one. We anticipate receiving a cert for the version 5.2.1 of the module, hopefully before January 1st of 2024. So this is just a continuation. This is the tail end of that timeline. We're in coordination, and then because we're getting very close and we anticipate that cert before January 1st, we already have started work on the first 5 operating environments that we're going to add to the cert on behalf of our customers. And we're referring to this 5.2.1 of the module as the pilot. So if you're talking to any of our engineers or account representatives and the term pilot comes up, you'll know what they're talking about. So we have received hardware to date for 20 operating environments that users want added to the cert. Like I said, we started work on the first 5, and I've got to get through those next 20 as quickly as possible. The CMVP has not yet opened up submissions for just OE editions. So I'll be working on as many as I can up until the point the CMVP says, okay, we're ready to start accepting OE editions for 140-3 certs. And however many I have done, all of them will go up at once on the first maintenance letter. And the way we've been queuing our customers up for me to work on the OEs is as soon as hardware arrives on site, your position in the current queue is locked in, and you're scheduled to start after I finish the one that arrived right before yours. So get us hardware as soon as possible if you're adding an OE to our cert, so I can get started on them as soon as possible. And then once this other version 5.2.0 receives its cert, I believe it's going to be a little delayed just due to this triage we've hit. But we should get that cert as well. We hope in very close proximity to the time we get to version 5.2.1. And what that'll mean is I can double the throughput of OEs that we can submit to the CMVP. They are the same module essentially. The one just has better debug statements or more human readable, more meaningful debug statements in it. But other than that, they're the same module. And so what we have been, we're limited on the maintenance letters that we can submit per certificate. So we can only do one maintenance letter at a time. I can add as many OEs as I want on a single maintenance letter, but once we send that letter up, we're kind of stuck until the CMVP reviews and approves the letter. We can't submit another one. So with 2 active certs, what I'll be able to do is submit a maintenance letter on one of the certs and then do some more OE testing and submit a second maintenance letter without having to wait for that first one to clear. They'll just go on separate certificates. but it's the same module underneath minus the debug statement improvements. And we have discussed internally for those customers of ours that are adding multiple OEs. Let's say a customer adds an OE now in February of 2024, and then they want to add another one a year later. We will make a conscious effort to make sure those customers' OEs end up on the same cert, since we have two of them, unless the customer says, you know, it's okay, we don't care if one goes on one cert and one on the other. And then beyond 2024, like I said, we're going to start work on a third cert here soon. I believe it'll still be a version 5.x of the module. It's possible it becomes a version 6.x if we change enough things. The third cert we do will be a 6 instead of a 5, and that would make the fourth then likely version 7.x. But either way, what the third certificate will be doing is adding a SRTP KDF into the module boundary. We'll be certifying that KDF. On the two submissions we have in process, we've only tested and are certifying the TLS version 1.3 KDF, the TLS version 1.2 KDF, and the SSH KDF. So this will be a fourth key derivation function that we're certifying. And I have heard some internal discussions in some of our team meetings that we're considering doing additional AES modes, potentially cipher feedback mode, CFB, and potentially XTS mode, the extended, what is that? XT, I don't remember exactly what the TS stands for. I apologize. But it's what everyone is now calling AES 512. It's really just two 256-bit keys being used in conjunction. So it's not truly a 512-bit key. But yeah, it's for data at rest or full drive encryption, from what I understand. Haven't read a lot about it myself, haven't tested it yet, but we're considering certifying that one as well. If there's anything else anyone would like to see us consider for this third certificate, like I said, you know, either bring it up at the end of this presentation in the QA session, or feel free to shoot us an email at support@wolfSSL.com so it gets tracked and logged in our support system. And then the fourth certificate, like I said, things are changing really rapidly right now in the FIPS industry. And so the fourth certificate that we end up doing will likely be late 2024 or maybe early 2025. And that will have our first set of post-quantum algorithms in it. We're currently working in-house on LMS and XMSS and Crystal's Kyber, I want to say. So those will be on the fourth certificate that we do in a year or two coming up. And as things continue to change in the FIPS industry, we will likely be doing more certificates, offering more options to our customers that need them. I've used the term OE a lot in these few slides leading up to this one, so I did want to clarify what is an OE for anyone who's not familiar with that term. An OE is an operating environment, and it's comprised of three items: the chipset or the CPU that the cryptography is running on, the operating system that is managing how instructions are passed to the chipset, and the cryptographic module itself. And when we certify an OE, we do have to call out, you can see these are fairly specific. So we couldn't certify Intel Core i7 in most cases. The CMVP will come back and say that's not specific enough. You need to point to an actual design or version of the i7. And then we'll do the operating system. With Windows, it's fairly high level, just Windows 10 Enterprise, but with Linux, they get a little more specific. We often have to call out either the kernel to the major and minor version. We do not call out the patched version because the CMVP wants users to be able to continue accepting vulnerability fixes, patches, security bug fixes, etc. But if something major changes, the CMVP does say you should recertify, and then that kind of leads us into the segue, which OE is right for you. The CMVP, while they will stipulate what they'll back FIPS certification claims on, the CMVP will say, well, if the OS changes in any significant way, we will no longer back those claims. But when you're selling this to someone in the federal space, you're often dealing with an end user called the Federal Procurement Officer. And it's their job to do a risk determination and decide if what appears on the FIPS certificate is good enough for how the module will be used and employed. So even though the CMVP says, well, you need to recertify because the OS changed in some significant way, the Federal Procurement Officer might say, we're okay with that change. We think it's still good enough. And they might purchase anyways, even without that specific OE listed on the certificate. So when you're trying to decide which OE is right for you, the best advice I can give is find that Federal Procurement Officer that's making the decisions, who's doing the risk determination, talk to them because they will tell you what needs to be on the cert in order for them to make the purchase. It's not ultimately up to the CMVP, it's up to that procurement officer on what they can and cannot purchase to satisfy their FIPS requirement. Oh, skip twice there. As far as what it takes for us to add an OE, under FIPS 140-2, an OE edition was called a 1 sub. I've got a slide in here, I think next. No, it's down a little further, but we'll cover that later. But these are now going to be called OE up, OE UP instead of 1 sub. So the term is changing, but it's the same submission scenario for all intents and purpose. And the steps to add an OE are you already have an existing FIPS certificate. Your module was certified on either one or multiple OEs, but you're adding a new one. We have to have physical hardware to test on. We need physical access to the CPU to be able to confirm that CPU with the FIPS lab. But other than that, you know, it's pretty straightforward. We just put the module on that system, compile it, document how it gets compiled and built. We do document the compiler version that was used, the flags that were passed into the compiler for 140-3. A lot of this is getting a little more strict as far as software being compiled for a given target. So we're listing out all the compiler details in the user guide. That way, if someone goes back to audit it later, they compile with the same compiler flags and all that to produce the final binary that gets executed on the target. We then process a series of vector requests from a lab. They come in the form of a JSON file. We have to do 2 sets. One's called the demo set and the other's called the production set. And then once those have passed, we receive our algorithm certificates, which get hosted on the NIST website. And that's the prerequisite to doing either NIAP common criteria or FIPS ultimately. Phase 2, after we've gotten our algorithm certificates, we then do operational testing, and if we had to make any code changes at all when porting to the new environment, let's say we didn't support the threading on that host system, and we had to add new code to support the mutex locking and unlocking and multi-threading capabilities. Then we'll go over all those changes with the FIPS lab. They'll make a determination if it's still capable of being done under a 1-sub OE edition, or if it has to be fully revalidated. If something changed significantly enough that the FIPS lab feels it may impact the cryptography itself, then we have to change this from a 1-sub to a 3 submission, which is a revalidation effort, and takes a little longer, but still doable. Once everything has passed the lab's review and they've submitted it to the CMVP, we consider that the end of milestone 2 and the beginning of milestone 3. And milestone 3 is we're just waiting on the CMVP to review all the testing and work that we did with the lab, approve it, and then publish the changes onto our certificate. And that can take as little as 5 days and as long as 6 months, depending on the CMVP's current backlog. Now we're getting into, some of the differences between the two programs, 140-2 and 140-3. So under 140-2, we had to do a power on self-test, which tested every algorithm in the module. And this could lead to, especially on low powered devices or slow clock speed devices, this could lead to significant delays in boot times, which was really problematic for a lot of our customers, especially in the IoT and edge device space. So under 140-3, there were enough complaints about this that they changed the requirement now to a conditional algorithm self-test instead of a power on self-test. And what that means is now you don't have to test the algorithm until or if you actually use that algorithm. So here it was, we don't care if you do an RSA operation ever, you're gonna test RSA, whereas now it's, if you aren't using RSA, you never have to test RSA, even though the module has it. And that'll lead to much faster boot times, and that's a huge win for IoT and embedded space devices. Under 140-2, they didn't have full KDF certification throughout the entire life of the program. They did get it towards the end, but with 140-3, we can certify the KDS from the very start out of the gate. And before, we could only certify, the dependencies the KDS depended on. So that's a good thing. With RSA, there was no testing for 3072-bit and 4096-bit, again, until the very, very near the end of the life of the 142 program. These did become available, but now we can test those, again, out of the gate. For OFB mode, that was always available, or it's been available for a long time. We just never bothered certifying that mode. In our newer modules, we are now certifying it. With 140-2, again, this is specific to just our module, not the whole program. We supported triple DES. We've removed triple DES in our 143 submissions because it's being disallowed by the CMVP in the very near future. And so we just don't want to have it on our cert and have to deal with removing it when the CMVP says it's no longer supported. Under 140-2, any error within the module meant that the module had to be power cycled to recover from the error state. With 140-3, now there's a degraded mode of operation that we support, and that means if a given algorithm fails its conditional algorithm self-test, it becomes no longer usable, but all the other algorithms and the module as a whole will continue to function. You do still have to power cycle to get out of degraded mode, but you can continue running in degraded mode. And these last two bullets are specific to our module, again, not the whole program. but in our module, there was no requirement to register an external entropy callback. Now, with entropy sources being certifiable on their own, we decided it was a good idea to make it a requirement that the application load an entropy callback on startup. That way you can either use the one we offer, which is not currently certified, it is in process of being certified, or you can load any external entropy source you want, and if it has an ESV cert associated with it, then you can claim that you're using a FIPS validated entropy source along with our FIPS validated cryptography. And then I already talked about this before, the private key access locking and unlocking, that wasn't a thing before, and that became mandatory for all software modules now. Here's the submission types. I won't go over all these in detail. These slides will be shared after the presentation if you're curious to kind of compare the differences and how they map up to each other. You should be able to get access to this slide to compare them, but it's basically all the same submission scenarios, except for, you know, before there was like 1B or 1 sub, and then there were some sub submission types under that, like 1A sub and 1B sub. Those are all now split out into unique and individual submission types. There's no longer like sub scenario submission types. But all the same submission scenarios are here. Some minor changes have been made. For example, there used to be this 30% qualifier, and it only applied within the first year. Some of that language has changed, so now it can be done anytime, but it can only be done under an update scenario and no longer done under a 1 sub scenario. And now we're going to go over kind of some of the NSA 2.0 or the CNSA 2.0 suite stuff that's coming out. So here's kind of a rough overview of the timeline. And this is the year I wasn't sure about at the beginning. So it is 2025. So all newer software and firmware signing, if you're signing a software or firmware image and you want to verify it, the NSA will require that you use XMSS and LMS by 2025. And that's why those two, we're currently working on them in-house, and those two will be on our 4th FIPS 140-3 certificate that we do either at the end of 2024 or into 2025. By 2030, everyone will have to switch to post-quantum algorithms if possible. And they can still have some classic algorithms mixed in, though, at the year 2030. And then by 2033, they will have to be exclusively only using post-quantum. So that's kind of the rough timeline that the NSA has targeted. I don't know if this timeline will stay this way through the future. A lot has been changing and things have been a bit of a moving target, so time will tell. This is just kind of some backstory on our library as a whole and our support for post-quantum. So we actually we were very conscious of post-quantum as far back as 2010. And True came out and we integrated it very rapidly. And we supported it up until the NIST competition where True submitted. We did have to drop support for the True we were supporting because a lot of the GitHub repos changed and it was no longer easy for us to pull in. But yeah, we've been supporting post-quantum for a long time now. And then as far as our internal work, like I said, we're already working on Crystals, Kyber, and XMSS, our own implementations. We have an LMS reference implementation we're depending on currently, but LMS will be our next algorithm that we write ourselves. And I'll let you guys look over this slide more after the presentation if you want to come back and review it. As far as our current status for post-quantum, we've already done, like I said, the N-True support. Then we started adding external third-party library support as soon as they started coming out. liboqs, PQM4, hash signatures, and XMSS reference designs. We're writing our own implementations in-house as we speak. Like I said, Crystal's Kyber XMSS, and then LMS will be next. And we'll continue adding those as time goes on. So if there are any questions or comments, or like I said, input on things you would like to see on our upcoming certifications that we're going to start work on here soon, this is the opportunity for that. So please put your stuff in either the comments or the question box, and we'll go from there. Back to you, Shizuka.
Thank you. I do have one question. Can you confirm which OE Android and iOS will there be?
So trying to remember, let me pull it up. I already started work on one of the Android OEs. I just gotta find which one it was. 1 second. It's already ready to go to a FIPS lab, but I I didn't memorize the details. So it will be Android. Oh shoot, that's not the right. Hang on. Bear with me for just 1 second. Android. There it is. Okay, so it'll be Android 12, and it'll be running on a Samsung Exynos 9611 system on a chip design, which has 4 Cortex A53s and 4 Cortex A73s in it. And what was the other one? iOS?
Yes.
There is currently no iOS that has been worked on. So let me see. I'll scan my future project, see if there is one. No, we had an iOS that was scheduled, but the customer decided to pull it. So there is currently no iOS in process and nothing on the schedule for it.
And there's another question that will you add one?
Of our just adding one on our own, no, not that I'm aware of. But if a customer needs it, yeah, just let us know. We'll work with you to get it added.
And also, I think the screen, Kaleb, I don't think we can see any slides on it. If you intended to show us the screen, yeah.
Did it stop sharing? Is it still sharing?
Yes, it is sharing now.
Okay, sorry about that.
And I do have another question. Do you see the 3+ years timeline continuing as you continue to submit for FIPS 140-3? Is there anything being done to push NIST to streamline this process?
The 3+ year timeline continuing. Oh, you mean, oh, yeah, okay, I understand the question. Do we see it taking 3 years every time we submit? So that's our hope that's why we were very happy to join the pilot program. The goal of automating a lot of these submissions is specifically to get all these timelines back down to what they used to be. It should be, in theory, if everything goes correctly, It should only take 1 year to do a full certification. It should only take about 6 months to do a revalidation, which is the old 3 sub, and it should only take 2 weeks to a month to do an OE update. So yeah, I do not foresee it continuing to be that 3+ year timeline moving into the future, but that's if the CMVP can get things done correctly. So cross your fingers.
And I have another question. When will post-quantum be absolutely required as opposed to just suggested?
2033. So we've got about 10 years before it'll be absolutely mandatory.
Let's see. And another question, why is your team working on so many FIPS certificates all of a sudden when historically it seems like you've only done one at a time?
Mostly just because of the changing nature. So much is happening so rapidly with post-quantum coming out, and a lot of the federal government requirements are changing. So even though we've got the 2 certificates now that'll live for 5 years, 2 years from now, it may come down the pipe. The NSA starts requiring post-quantum sooner than they originally said. If a post-quantum computer actually comes out that's capable of processing more than 8 to 10 qubits of information, things might change really rapidly, really suddenly. And so that's what we're trying to prepare for. We're trying to be ahead of the ball. So.
And another question, when adding the SRTP KDF to wolfCrypt, please be aware of IETF RFC errata IDC 712. It was not considered by SB 800. That's 135.
Understood.
Oh, I guess yeah. I guess it was not a question.
Yep.
Yeah. And another question, how much lead time should I be prepared for if I have no HEPS customer to justify adding an OE today, but may have a customer in the future?
At least 3 months to get an OE added to the cert, but try to plan on potentially 6 months if the CMVP is running really slow. So yeah, give anyone looking to add an OE, they need to plan at least 3 to 6 month lead time before it can appear on the certificate.
If there is no any questions, then thank you, Kaleb, for hosting an informative webinar and everyone for joining the webinar today. Please don't forget to follow us on Twitter at wolfSSL as well as at the social. And thank you again and see you next week.
Okay. Thanks so much, Shizuka. All right. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you, Kaleb.